Chapter 1. The Curious Message. It was during the bitter winter of 1891 that my friend Sherlock Holmes and I found ourselves entangled in one of the most peculiar cases of our long association. Snow had fallen heavily for 3 days, transforming London into a ghostly landscape of white. Baker Street lay buried beneath a pristine blanket that muffled the usual clamour, creating an eerie silence hanging in the air like a premonition. My dear Mary's persistent influenza had prompted her visit to her sister in the countryside, leaving me temporarily installed once more at 221B Baker Street. Holmes had welcomed me with characteristic indifference that I knew concealed genuine pleasure at having his chronicler returned. On this particular evening, we sat before a roaring fire, Holmes examining the evening papers with evident disappointment. His remarkable brain, like a precision engine, required constant fuel in the form of worthy problems. Without such stimulation, he would invariably turn to that 7% solution I so despised. "Nothing, Watson," he muttered, casting aside the Daily Telegraph. "Not a single problem that rises above the tedious commonplace." "Perhaps even criminals find the weather prohibitive," I suggested. Holmes made a sound between a laugh and a snort. The truly determined villain would recognize the tactical advantage offered by weather that keeps witnesses indoors and obscures footprints within hours. A sharp knock at our door caused us both to start. Mrs. Hudson had retired, and visitors at such an hour were unusual. Holmes's eyes gleamed with sudden interest. "Our visitor has travelled some distance through the snow, is of medium height but considerable physical strength, and appears to be in a state of extreme agitation." "How could you possibly know that?" "The knock, Watson. Forceful, but not at the height one would expect from a tall man. As for the journey and agitation, listen." I detected the sound of heavy breathing and stomping feet on the landing, removing accumulated snow. "Come in," Holmes called. The door opened to reveal a broad-shouldered, compact man of perhaps 40, with a weathered complexion. His clothes, though of good quality, were dishevelled, and his face bore marks of profound distress. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he inquired, his voice carrying the distinctive burr of the North Country. "I am he," my friend replied, introducing me as his trusted colleague. "James Mortimer Blackwood, of Blackwood Manor in Cumberland," the man stated. "I've travelled directly from my estate because I fear that unless you intervene, another life will be claimed by what my household calls the Weeping Ghost." Holmes leaned forward. "Tell us precisely what brings you to Baker Street on such a night." 3 days ago, my elder brother Nathaniel was found dead in our ancestral home. The circumstances defy rational explanation. He was discovered locked inside his study, the key still in the door on the inside. The windows were similarly secured, yet his throat was torn open, and the room was awash with blood, so much that it seeped beneath the door, forming what the maid described as tears of red down the oak panelling. "The local constabulary is baffled," Blackwood continued. "They speak of wild animals, despite the impossibility. The servants whisper of the Weeping Ghost, said to haunt our lands since Cromwell's time. A spectre that cries tears of blood before claiming a Blackwood life." "And what do you believe claimed your brother's life?" Holmes inquired. "I believe he was murdered by human hands, however impossible that may appear. and I fear I shall be next." From his coat, Blackwood withdrew a yellowed envelope and handed it to Holmes. This arrived before Nathaniel's death. An identical letter was delivered to me yesterday. Holmes extracted a single sheet containing 7 words written in what appeared to be dried brown ink. "The ghost weeps blood. You shall follow." "Interesting," Holmes remarked after examination. "The paper is expensive, but at least 15 years old. The ink, I suspect, is not ink at all, but blood." Our visitor blanched visibly. "I place no stock in superstitions," Holmes stated firmly, "but I do recognize a clever and methodical killer when I see evidence of one. Who stands to gain from the deaths of you and your brother?" "The Blackwood estate is considerable. With Nathaniel gone, and should I follow, everything passes to our younger brother Percival. But I cannot believe—" "It is a cardinal error to theorize without data," Holmes interrupted, rising. "Watson, can your practice spare you? We shall catch the morning train to Cumberland." Holmes turned to our visitor. "This legend of the weeping ghost, what caused its creation?" "During the Civil War, my ancestor betrayed royalist soldiers seeking sanctuary. Among them was a woman disguised as a soldier, trying to reach her cavalier lover. Legend says she wept tears of blood, cursing the Blackwood name, and vowing that every 3rd generation the ghost would return to claim Blackwood brothers." "And you represent the 3rd generation since the last deaths?" 3 Blackwood brothers died mysteriously in 1831, all found behind locked doors, throats torn open. History prepares to repeat itself, or so our adversary would have us believe. The game is afoot. After our visitor departed, I turned to Holmes with excitement. "What do you make of it? Surely there cannot be any truth to this ghost story." Friend reached for his tobacco, a sure sign his formidable brain was engaged. "Ghosts make convenient scapegoats for the ingenious criminal. Someone is orchestrating these deaths with theatrical flair, exploiting an old legend to disguise very modern motives. The locked room presents a worthy challenge." A slow smile spread across his features. "Pack for cold weather, Watson. Cumberland promises us a most stimulating diversion." Little did I know that the case of the weeping ghost would test even Holmes's remarkable powers to their limit, bringing us face to face with Chapter 2, The Blackwood Estate. The journey to Cumberland was long and arduous. A heavy mist had settled across the countryside, transforming the landscape into something ethereal and somehow menacing. Holmes spent most of the journey in contemplative silence, his sharp eyes occasionally darting to the window, as if the passing scenery might yield some clue to the mystery that awaited us. I occupied myself with the morning papers, though my thoughts continually returned to the bizarre circumstances of Nathaniel Blackwood's death. "Tell me, Watson," Holmes said suddenly, breaking his long silence as our train wound through the northern hills. "What do you make of our client's story?" "It presents a classic locked-room puzzle," I replied, "though I confess the supernatural elements trouble me." A thin smile played across my friend's face. The supernatural is merely the natural not yet understood. When faced with seemingly impossible circumstances, one must adhere more strictly than ever to logic and reason. The train pulled into the small station at Ravenglass by mid-afternoon. A sombre-faced coachman awaited us, introducing himself as Thorne, the Blackwood family driver of 20 years' standing. He seemed genuinely distressed by recent events, his weathered face tightening at the mention of the strange business at the manor. During our hour-long carriage ride, the landscape grew increasingly wild and desolate. Ancient stone walls crisscrossed the misty moors, and in the distance, the Irish Sea churned beneath a leaden sky. "There it is," Thorne announced as we crested a hill. "Blackwood Manor." The ancestral home of the Blackwood family loomed before us, a sprawling Tudor structure, with later Gothic additions that gave it a somewhat disjointed appearance. 2 wings extended from the central building like outstretched arms, their windows dark and uninviting despite the early hour. A light rain had begun to fall, shrouding the estate in a grey veil. "The east wing," Holmes murmured, pointing to the right-hand extension. That would be where Nathaniel Blackwood met his end. James Blackwood greeted us at the entrance, his expression betraying both relief and anxiety. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank God you've come. There have been developments." Holmes's eyebrows rose sharply. "Of what nature?" "Follow me," Blackwood said grimly. "It's better you see for yourself." He led us through a labyrinth of corridors panelled in dark oak, our footsteps echoing on the flagstone floors. Portraits of stern-faced Blackwood ancestors watched our progress, their eyes seeming to follow us accusingly. I noticed that Holmes studied these paintings with particular interest. We turned into a corridor where a young maid was on her hands and knees, scrubbing frantically at the floor. She looked up as we approached, her face pale with fear. "It won't come out, sir," she whispered to Blackwood. "I've tried everything." The object of her attention was a dark stain that had seeped into the grout between the stones. It formed a distinct pattern, like a trail of tears trailing down from the wall. "This appeared overnight," Blackwood explained, "directly outside my bedchamber." Holmes knelt beside the stain, producing his magnifying glass. "Fascinating. This is indeed blood, and quite fresh. Less than 12 hours old, I should say. Not animal blood either." "Human?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Holmes nodded grimly. "The servants are calling it the tears of the ghost," Blackwood said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They say it's a warning, that I shall be next. Has anything else unusual occurred?" Holmes asked, still examining the stain. "Yes, my brother Percival arrived this morning. He was not expected." Holmes straightened immediately. "I should like to meet this brother of yours, Mr. Blackwood. But first, show me where Nathaniel died." The study where the eldest Blackwood brother had met his fate was a handsome room lined with bookshelves. A large mahogany desk dominated the space, behind which tall windows overlooked the wild gardens. Despite obvious cleaning efforts, the metallic scent of blood lingered. "Nothing has been moved?" Holmes inquired, beginning his methodical examination of the scene. "Only my brother's body. The local police insisted on taking it for examination." Holmes moved about the room with the precision of a bloodhound, examining the lock, the windows, the fireplace, and every inch of the oriental carpet that covered most of the floor. He paid particular attention to the desk, where several papers were arranged in neat stacks. "Your brother was working on something before his death?" Blackwood nodded. "Estate matters primarily. Nathaniel always handled the family finances." "And who benefits most from these financial arrangements now that he is gone?" A shadow crossed Blackwood's face. I inherit his position as head of the family, but Percival inherits a considerable sum that had been held in trust. There was some dispute about it. Holmes made no comment, but continued his examination. Suddenly, he dropped to his knees, using his lens to study something beneath the desk. Watson, your medical opinion, if you please." I joined him and saw what had caught his attention. Tiny droplets of what appeared to be blood, forming a trail that led directly to the solid wall. "Most interesting," Holmes murmured. "Mr. Blackwood, is there a secret passage in this room?" Our host looked genuinely startled. "Not that I'm aware of. This house has stood for centuries, but I've never heard of hidden passages in the East Wing." Holmes rapped his knuckles against the wood panelling, listening intently to the sound it produced. "I believe your house keeps secrets even from its master, Mr. Blackwood." His fingers pressed against an ornate carving, and to our amazement, a section of the wall swung inward with the faintest of creaks. "Good Lord!" Blackwood exclaimed. "I had no idea." Holmes peered into the darkness beyond. A hidden passage indeed, recently used, judging by the disturbance in the dust. This, I believe, is how our killer entered and exited a locked room. Before we could explore further, a commotion in the hallway drew our attention. The door burst open to reveal a man who bore a striking resemblance to our host. Though his features were sharper, his manner more agitated. "James, what is the meaning of this? Who are these men?" His gaze fell upon Holmes, and something like fear flickered across his face. "You're Sherlock Holmes." "And you," Holmes replied calmly, "must be Percival Blackwood. Your arrival is most opportune. I have several questions regarding your unexpected return to the family home." "I came as soon as I heard of Nathaniel's death," Percival said stiffly, "as any brother would." "Indeed. Yet your telegram to London was sent before the news of your brother's demise could possibly have reached you in Edinburgh. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, thunder rumbled across the moors as the storm intensified, casting the room into momentary darkness. In that fleeting shadow, I could have sworn I saw something move in the hidden passage behind us. A pale figure with tears of crimson streaming down its cheeks. Chapter 3. Family Secrets. "I don't appreciate your insinuations, Mr. Holmes," Percival Blackwood said coldly, recovering his composure. "News travels quickly in certain circles." Holmes merely smiled. "Indeed it does, though rarely faster than the telegraph. Perhaps we might continue this conversation after I've had the opportunity to explore this passage." With that, my friend withdrew a small lantern from his coat. Holmes was ever prepared, and disappeared into the dark opening. I moved to follow, but he gestured for me to remain. "Stay with our hosts, Watson. I shan't be long." The minutes of his absence stretched uncomfortably, filled with the awkward silence between the Blackwood brothers. James appeared troubled by the discovery, while Percival maintained an air of studied indifference that seemed forced to my eye. "You were unaware of this passage?" I asked James, attempting to break the tension. "Completely," he replied, "though it makes sense. This house dates back to the time when Catholics were persecuted. Many such estates had priest holes and escape routes." "Nathaniel knew," Percival interjected suddenly. "He knew all the secrets of this place." Before I could question this curious statement, Holmes emerged from the hidden passage, his expression inscrutable, but his eyes alight with the excitement of discovery. "Most illuminating," he said, brushing dust from his sleeves. "The passage connects to a network of tunnels beneath the east wing, eventually leading outside to the old chapel ruins. An ideal route for clandestine comings and goings." "Are there any signs of recent use?" I asked. "Abundant," Holmes replied. "Footprints in the dust, a dropped handkerchief, a lady's by the delicate embroidery, and this." He held up a small object that gleamed in the lamplight. A cufflink bearing the Blackwood crest. Both brothers stared at the item, but it was Percival who spoke. "That's Nathaniel's. He had a pair made specially last year. Curious that it should be found in a passage he allegedly did not use, is it not?" Holmes pocketed the cufflink. "Gentlemen, I believe it's time we spoke plainly. This house harbours secrets beyond architectural curiosities, and those secrets have led to murder." James Blackwood paled visibly. "Shall we retire to the drawing room? This discussion requires brandy." The drawing room was a spacious chamber dominated by a massive fireplace, above which hung the largest portrait we had yet seen. A stern-faced man in Civil War-era dress, his hand resting possessively on a bejeweled sword hilt. "Edward Blackwood," James explained, noting my interest. "The ancestor who supposedly earned our family curse." "Supposedly?" Holmes inquired, accepting a glass of brandy. "James still clings to rationality," Percival said with a humourless laugh, "despite everything." "And you don't, Mr. Blackwood?" Holmes fixed his penetrating gaze on the younger brother. "I've seen things in this house that defy explanation, Mr. Holmes. We all have. Nathaniel most of all. Tell me about these unexplainable occurrences." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks as Percival considered his response. "Sounds in the night, objects moving without being touched, cold spots that persist even in summer, and the tears, blood seeping from walls where no blood should be." He leaned forward. 3 weeks ago, Nathaniel came to my rooms at midnight, white as a sheet. He said he'd seen her, the ghost, standing at the foot of his bed, weeping tears of blood and pointing toward the east wing. "Did you believe him?" I asked. "I believed he was frightened," Percival replied carefully. "Nathaniel was not a fanciful man-doctor. Whatever he saw that night, it terrified him enough to send him searching through the family archives." Holmes's interest visibly sharpened. "What was he seeking?" "I don't know precisely," James interjected, "but he spent days in the library examining the family histories, particularly accounts of the deaths in 1831. The previous generation claimed by the curse," Holmes mused. "And did he find what he sought?" "He found something," Percival said. "The night before he died, he told me he'd discovered the truth behind the legend. He was exhilarated, almost manic. He promised to reveal everything the next day." "But by the next day, he was dead," Holmes finished. "Most convenient for someone who might have wished his discoveries to remain buried." An uncomfortable silence fell. Outside, the storm had intensified, rain lashing against the windows in sheets. "Mr. Holmes," James said finally, "do you believe Nathaniel was murdered because of something he discovered? It seems the most logical conclusion. Tell me, where are these family archives now? Still in the library, I presume?" James replied, "though I haven't checked. Then we shall make that our next point of investigation," Holmes declared. "But first, one final question. Who else besides yourselves was aware of Nathaniel's research?" "Sure." Brothers exchanged glances. "The servants, obviously," James said. "And Victoria." "Victoria?" I inquired. "Our cousin," Percival explained. "She's staying in the West Wing. Has been for several months, since her father, our uncle, passed away." "She and Nathaniel were close," James added with a significant look at his brother that didn't escape Holmes's notice. "How close, precisely?" Holmes asked. Percival's expression darkened. "Close enough that there was talk of marriage. Despite her being our cousin, Nathaniel's will leaves her a considerable portion of his personal estate." "Another beneficiary of his death," Holmes observed. "I should very much like to meet this cousin." "You'll have to wait until dinner," James replied. "Victoria rarely leaves her rooms during the day. She's become something of a recluse since Nathaniel's death." "A house of secrets and seclusion," Holmes murmured. "How very convenient for a murderer." As we left the drawing-room to examine the library, I noticed Holmes pausing before Edward Blackwood's portrait, studying it with unusual intensity. "Something interesting, Holmes?" "Merely noting the family resemblance," he replied. "And the sword, see how prominently it's displayed? A cavalier's weapon, Watson. Not what one would expect in the possession of a Cromwell sympathizer." Before I could respond, a piercing scream echoed through the house, followed by the sound of running footsteps. James Blackwood rushed past us, toward the grand staircase. "It's from Victoria's room," he cried. Holmes and I followed at speed, racing up the stairs and down a long corridor to the west wing. The door to one of the chambers stood ajar, and from within came the sound of hysterical sobbing. We burst into an elegant bedroom where a young woman, presumably Victoria, stood trembling by the window, her face ashen with terror. She pointed wordlessly to her dressing-table mirror. Written across the glass in what appeared to be fresh blood were 7 words. 2 brothers down. 1 more to follow. Chapter 4. The lady in the West Wing, Holmes approached the mirror, studying the bloody message without touching it. The crimson letters glistened in the dim light, still wet. "When did you discover this, miss?" Holmes asked, turning to the young woman. "Victoria Blackwood," she replied, visibly struggling to compose herself. "Just moments ago. I was preparing for dinner when I noticed it in the reflection." Victoria Blackwood was a striking woman of perhaps 25, with the same dark hair and sharp features that characterized the family. She wore a black mourning dress, her pale complexion accentuated by her grief. "And you heard nothing? Saw no one enter your room?" Holmes pressed. "No one," she whispered. "The door was locked. I always lock it." Holmes exchanged a meaningful glance with me. "Another locked room mystery within these walls." "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the window. Victoria nodded, and Holmes examined it carefully. Sealed shut, painted over years ago. No one entered this way. "Then how?" James began. "The same way our killer accessed Nathaniel's study," Holmes replied. "There must be another hidden passage. This house appears to be honeycombed with them." He began a methodical examination of the walls, tapping and pressing various panels. Meanwhile, I attended to Victoria, whose initial shock was giving way to a more controlled demeanour. "You were close to Nathaniel, I understand," I said gently. A shadow crossed her face. "We were to be married in the spring. The family disapproved, of course. Cousins, you know. But Nathaniel didn't care for convention. And now you inherit a portion of his estate," Percival remarked coldly from the doorway. Victoria flushed. "Do you think I wanted his money? I loved him." "How convenient that you express that love now that he's dead," Percival shot back. "That's enough," James intervened. "This is hardly the time." "Ah!" Holmes exclaimed, cutting through the family tension. His fingers had located a small catch disguised within the carved wainscoting. A section of the wall pivoted silently, revealing a dark passageway similar to the one we'd discovered in Nathaniel's study. "Fascinating," Holmes murmured, examining. "The mechanism, expertly concealed. One would need intimate knowledge of this house to locate it without guidance." "Just as I said," Percival declared. "The ghost knows all the secrets of Blackwood Manor." Holmes ignored the comment, instead retrieving his lantern to peer down the passage. "Watson, perhaps you would accompany me. The rest of you remain here," followed Holmes into the narrow corridor, which was barely wide enough for a person to traverse sideways. The stonework was ancient, green with dampness in places. "What do you make of it, Holmes?" I whispered as we crept along. "Someone in this house is orchestrating an elaborate charade, Watson. The question is whether they are doing so to disguise a simple motive. Inheritance, perhaps, or if there is something more sinister at play." The passage turned sharply, descending via a tight spiral staircase. At the bottom, Holmes paused, holding the lantern high. We stood in a small chamber lined with decaying bookshelves. A priest's hiding hole converted to a secret study, Holmes observed, examining the ancient volumes. "And recently used." He pointed to a desk where papers lay scattered alongside a half-burned candle. A leather-bound book lay open, its pages covered with cramped handwriting. Holmes bent to examine it. Nathaniel Blackwood's journal, unless I miss my guess. Listen to this entry, dated 3 weeks ago. "I have seen her again tonight. She weeps for justice long denied. The truth lies in Edward's sword, but I must be certain before I act. P must not know what I've discovered." "P?" I asked. "Percival?" "So it would seem," Holmes replied, carefully placing the journal in his pocket. "Come, Watson. I believe we have lingered long enough." When we emerged from the passage, we found Victoria seated on a chaise, with James attending to her. Percival stood by the window, staring out at the storm-lashed grounds. "Did you find anything?" James asked anxiously. Holmes hesitated, then produced a small object from his pocket. Not the journal, which he had concealed, but a woman's handkerchief, identical to the one he had found earlier. "This was dropped in the passage," he said. "It bears the monogram VB." All eyes turned to Victoria, who paled visibly. "That's mine," she admitted. "But I haven't been in any secret passage. I didn't even know they existed." "Yet here is your handkerchief," Holmes noted. "And another just like it was found in the passage connected to Nathaniel's study." I've lost several recently," she stammered. "They've been disappearing from my room. Or perhaps you've been dropping them during nocturnal wanderings," Percival suggested darkly. Victoria rose to her feet, indignation overcoming fear. "You dare accuse me? When you stand to gain everything from your brother's deaths?" "Enough," Holmes interjected. "No accusations without evidence. For now, I suggest we all proceed with caution. No one should be alone in this house." A house servant appeared at the door, announcing that dinner was served. As we made our way to the dining room, Holmes drew me aside. "Watch Victoria carefully during dinner, Watson. Note her reactions, particularly when the conversation turns to Nathaniel's research." The dining room was a cavernous chamber dominated by a long oak table that could easily seat 20. Only 5 places were set at one end. The walls were adorned with hunting trophies and more family portraits, dimly visible in the flickering candlelight. As we took our seats, I noticed James's hand trembling as he reached for his wine glass. "Are you unwell, Mr. Blackwood?" I inquired. "Just tired, Doctor. I haven't slept properly since Nathaniel's death." "Understandable," Holmes remarked. "Miss Blackwood, I understand you've been at the manor for several months. In that time, did you observe anything unusual about Nathaniel's behavior, particularly in the weeks before his death?" Victoria hesitated, her finger tracing the rim of her glass. "Heber became obsessed with the family history, especially the legend. He spent hours in the library, and sometimes I would find him talking to himself in the gallery, staring at the old portraits." "Did he ever mention Edward's sword?" Holmes asked casually. Victoria's fork clattered against her plate. "How did you—" Her question was cut short by a sudden violent gust of wind that extinguished every candle in the room, plunging us into darkness. In the moment before the servants rushed to relight them, I could have sworn I heard a woman's voice, soft but distinct whispering, "Justice comes for the betrayer's line." Chapter 5. Edward's sword chaos erupted in the darkened dining room. A servant shrieked, crystal shattered, and James Blackwood called desperately for lights. When the candles were finally relit, I found Holmes standing perfectly still, his keen eyes scanning the room's shadowy corners. "Did anyone else hear it?" Victoria whispered, her face drained of colour. "A trick of the wind," Percival declared, though his voice lacked conviction. Holmes said nothing, but I recognized the slight tightening around his eyes, the look he wore when a puzzle piece had just fallen into place. "Mr. Blackwood," he said suddenly, addressing James, "I should like to examine the portrait of Edward Blackwood more closely, and if I may, the sword mentioned in your ancestor's painting." James hesitated. "The sword is no longer attached to the portrait. It hangs in the armory, along with other family heirlooms." "Then to the armory we shall go," Holmes declared, rising from his barely touched meal. The armory was located in the manor's oldest section, a low-ceilinged chamber whose walls bristled with weapons spanning centuries, from medieval broadswords to more modern firearms. Glass cases displayed smaller items, daggers, pistols, and military decorations. "There," James indicated, pointing to a magnificent sword mounted above the fireplace. Its hilt was ornately decorated with gold filigree and what appeared to be rubies, for Edward's sword, passed down since the Civil War. Holmes studied it with obvious interest. "May I?" With James's permission, he carefully removed the weapon from its mounting. The blade, despite its age, gleamed in the lamplight as Holmes examined every inch with his lens. "Curious," he murmured. "This blade has been well maintained over centuries. Yet there are minute scratches around the hilt, quite recent." His long fingers probed delicately at the pommel. "Watson, your medical bag. Might I borrow your smallest forceps?" I complied, mystified by his interest in this ancient weapon. Using the forceps with surgical precision, Holmes manipulated something in the sword's hilt. There was a faint click, and the pommel loosened, just as I suspected, he said triumphantly. A hidden compartment. From within the hollowed pommel, Holmes extracted a tightly rolled piece of parchment, yellowed with age. With delicate care, he unrolled it on a nearby table. "What is it?" James asked, leaning forward. "A letter," Holmes replied, "written in a feminine hand, dated 1643. He read aloud, "My dearest Edward, I write in desperation. The soldiers you promised to protect seek me even now. Your betrayal cuts deeper than any blade. You swore your love, took my virtue, and now abandon me to Cromwell's men for your advancement. If I perish, let my blood be on your hands and those of your line. The truth of your treachery shall remain sealed in this sword until justice claims. The last Blackwood brother. 3 generations hence, and 3 again, I shall return. Catherine Beaumont." A heavy silence followed Holmes's recitation. "Catherine Beaumont," Victoria whispered. "The woman from the legend, the one disguised as a soldier." "It would appear," Holmes observed, "that the traditional telling of your family curse omits certain details. Edward Blackwood didn't merely betray royalist soldiers. He betrayed the woman he loved." "Nathaniel found this," James said with sudden realization. "This is what he discovered, that the legend was based on truth." "Indeed," Holmes agreed, "and someone was determined he should not reveal that truth. Percival, who had remained unusually quiet, suddenly spoke. This changes nothing. A mouldering letter doesn't explain locked rooms or blood appearing on walls." "No," Holmes conceded, "but it offers motive. Someone in this house has exploited an old family legend to commit very modern murder." As Holmes carefully resealed the letter within the sword, a thought occurred to me. "Holmes, if this letter was hidden in the sword all along, how did the story of Catherine's curse become legend? In the first place, someone must have known." "An excellent point, Watson. The answer may lie in the family archives. Mr. Blackwood, I believe it's time we examine those records Nathaniel was so interested in." The library was a magnificent room, 2 stories tall with galleries running around the upper level. Thousands of volumes lined the shelves, and a massive oak table in the centre was still covered with the books Nathaniel had been consulting before his death. "He spent hours here," Victoria said softly. "Sometimes entire days." Holmes moved directly to the table examining the open volumes. County histories, genealogical records, private journals. He was thorough in his research. I picked up a small leather-bound book. This appears to be a diary from 1831, the year the previous Blackwood brothers died. Holmes took it eagerly, flipping through the brittle pages. "Listen to this entry. May 12, 1831. Harold found dead this morning. throat torn as if by beast, room locked from within. Thomas insists we leave, but Richard will not hear of it. He believes he has found something in Edward's papers that will end this curse forever. And did he? James asked anxiously. The next entry is more illuminating, Holmes continued. May 15th. Richard revealed the terrible truth today. Our ancestors' betrayal was worse than we imagined. The woman, Catherine, was with child when she died. Edward knew this, yet still gave her to Cromwell's men. Richard intends to make amends somehow. He speaks of a descendant we must find. A descendant, Victoria repeated, of Catherine Beaumont. It would seem so, Holmes confirmed, but the diary ends abruptly. The final brother must have died before he could act on his discovery. Ensure, Holmes spoke. I noticed Percival slip quietly from the room. His behaviour throughout the evening had grown increasingly suspicious. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. In their momentary light, I caught sight of something on the ceiling above the table, a dark stain that had not been there moments before. As I watched in horror, crimson droplets began to fall onto the open books, splashing like tears across the pages. "Holmes!" I gasped. All eyes turned upward. The stain was spreading, forming what appeared to be words visible in the flickering firelight. Find her descendant. Time grows short. The ghost speaks plainly now. Victoria whispered. Not a ghost, Holmes said grimly, already moving toward the door. Someone who knows we're getting close to the truth. Watson, quickly! We must find Percival before... A gunshot echoed through the manor, followed by a piercing scream from the direction of the east wing. Chapter 6. Blood and Revelation. Holmes and I raced through the manor's labyrinthine corridors towards the east wing, James and Victoria close behind us. The ancient floorboards creaked beneath our hurried footsteps as thunder crashed outside, momentarily drowning out the sound of our approach. We found the housemaid Thorne had mentioned earlier, trembling against the wall outside Percival's bedchamber, her face ashen with terror. "In there," she whispered, pointing a shaking finger at the half-open door. "Mr. Percival." Holmes pushed the door wide, revealing a scene of disturbing familiarity. Percival Blackwood lay sprawled across an oriental carpet, a pistol several feet from his outstretched hand. Blood pooled beneath him, seeping into the rug's intricate pattern. Yet, unlike his brother, his wounds were different. A single bullet, wound to the chest rather than a torn throat. Is he... Victoria couldn't finish the question. I knelt beside the body, checking for vital signs. He's alive, but barely. The bullet appears to have missed his heart by inches. Turning to James, I added, "We need to get him to a hospital immediately." "Impossible in this storm," James replied, his voice strained. "The roads will be washed out. Could you—" "I'll do what I can," I assured him, already opening my medical bag. As I worked to stabilize Percival, Holmes conducted his methodical examination of the room. Like Nathaniel's study, this chamber appeared to be locked from within. The key still in the door on the inside. The windows remained sealed against the raging tempest. "Did anyone see Percival after he left the library?" Holmes asked, examining the pistol without touching it. Victoria shook her head. "I assumed he'd gone to his room." "And the shot?" Who heard it first? I did, sir, the maid said timidly. I was turning down the beds when I heard a terrible commotion in Mr. Percival's room, like furniture being overturned. Then the gunshot. Dear, you see anyone enter or leave? No, sir. The corridor was empty. Holmes nodded thoughtfully, turning his attention to the walls. Within minutes, he had located another hidden passage behind a bookcase, disturbed dust indicating recent use. Our mysterious assailant seems determined to make this appear supernatural, he remarked. A series of locked room attacks following, the pattern of an ancient curse. With Percival stabilized as best I could manage, we carried him to his bed. His breathing was labored but steady. As we arranged the blankets, a folded piece of paper fell from his pocket. Holmes retrieved it, his expression darkening as he read its contents. "What is it?" James asked. "A letter," Holmes replied, "addressed to Percival, written in what appears to be the same hand as the threatening notes you and Nathaniel received." He read aloud, "I know what you did. Tonight you pay for your ancestors' sins and your own. The last brother shall not escape justice." Then it was attempted murder, not suicide, I observed, noting the angle of the bullet wound made self-infliction unlikely. "Indeed, Watson, but there is something odd about this scenario. The assailant clearly wants these attacks to appear supernatural, yet this method, a simple shooting, lacks the theatrical elements of Nathaniel's murder." "Perhaps they were interrupted," Victoria suggested. "The maid said she heard a commotion before the shot." Holmes nodded. "A struggle would explain it. Percival may have fought his attacker." "But who?" James asked, his voice hollow. "Who would want to kill my brothers?" "Someone executing what they believe to be justice," Holmes replied grimly. "Someone connected to Catherine Beaumont." While James arranged for servants to watch over, his wounded brother Holmes led us back to the library. The bloody message on the ceiling had dried to a rust-brown stain, its words still legibly ominous. "Find her descendant," Holmes mused. "The key to this mystery lies in tracking Catherine Beaumont's bloodline to the present day." "After nearly 300 years?" I asked skeptically. "That seems nearly impossible." "Not at all, Watson. Nathaniel Blackwood had already done much of the work for us." Holmes returned to the research materials spread across the table, separating those that appeared most recently handled. County birth records, marriage licenses, parish registries. He was methodically tracing a lineage. Victoria joined us at the table, her earlier fear replaced by determined curiosity. "What are we looking for specifically?" "Any mention of Catherine Beaumont's child," Holmes replied. "According to the diary entry, she was pregnant when she died. If that child somehow survived—" "But how could it have?" James objected. "If Catherine was executed." "The records of that time are inconsistent," Holmes interrupted, poring over a leather-bound volume. "Many were destroyed during later conflicts. What if Catherine wasn't executed immediately? What if she gave birth before her death?" For nearly an hour, we combed through the documents, putting together fragments of a narrative that had lain scattered across centuries. Finally, Holmes held up a yellowed page triumphantly. "Here, a baptismal record from a village 10 miles hence, dated 6 months after Catherine's supposed execution. A child named Mary, mother listed only as CB, deceased. The child was taken in by a family named Winters." "Winters," Victoria repeated, her expression strangely altered. "But that's your mother's maiden name," Holmes finished for her, watching her reaction carefully. "Yes, I took the liberty of reviewing the family Bible in the drawing room earlier. Today, Victoria Winters Blackwood, daughter of Elizabeth Winters and George Blackwood, Nathaniel's uncle." The silence that followed was profound. "Are you suggesting," James said slowly, "that Victoria is Catherine Beaumont's descendant?" "I am suggesting," Holmes replied, "that Victoria is descended from both the betrayer and the betrayed. A child of both bloodlines, united after centuries of separation." Victoria's face had gone completely white. That's why Nathaniel was researching the family history so intently. He must have discovered. But why wouldn't he tell me? "Perhaps he intended to," I suggested gently, "before he was killed." Holmes was already moving toward the door. "I believe we'll find more answers in Miss Blackwood's chambers. There's another piece to this puzzle we've yet to uncover." As we followed Holmes through the mansion's darkened halls, a chill draught extinguished the lamps one by one, plunging us into darkness. In the momentary blindness, I felt something brush past me, a presence that carried with it the faint scent of lavender and copper. When the servants relit the lamps, Victoria had vanished. Chapter 7. The Woman in the Walls. "Victoria!" James called into the darkness, his voice echoing through the empty corridor. "Where could she have gone?" Holmes was already examining the nearest wall, his fingers tracing the ornate wainscoting. "Another hidden passage, I suspect. This house appears to have been designed for concealment and clandestine movement. If she is Catherine's descendant," I ventured, "might she have knowledge of these passages that even the family doesn't possess? Perhaps passed down through generations." "An astute observation, Watson," Holmes replied, his fingers suddenly pausing on a carved rosette. With a gentle press, a section of panelling slid silently open, revealing yet another dark passageway. "It seems our quarry knows this house intimately." Holmes retrieved his lantern, and we entered the narrow corridor. Unlike the passage behind, Nathaniel's study, this one showed signs of frequent use. The dust on the floor was disturbed by multiple footprints, and the cobwebs had been cleared away. "Do you believe Victoria is responsible for these murders?" James asked, his voice tight with distress. "I reserve judgment until all facts are in evidence," Holmes replied diplomatically, though I detected a note of caution in his tone. "What troubles me is the apparent contradiction in motive. If Victoria is indeed descended from Catherine Beaumont, she might conceivably bear a grudge against the Blackwood line. Yet she herself is a Blackwood, and was to marry Nathaniel, the very man whose death initiated these events. Perhaps she discovered her dual heritage only recently," I suggested. "Possibly through Nathaniel's research." "That would explain his sudden interest in the family history," James agreed. As we proceeded deeper into the passage, the air grew colder and damper. The corridor sloped downward, leading us beneath the manor's foundations. Eventually, we emerged into a larger chamber that appeared to have once been a chapel crypt. Stone effigies of long-dead Blackwoods lay atop weathered sarcophagi, their faces worn smooth by time. "We must be beneath the old chapel ruins," James whispered, clearly discomforted by our surroundings. Holmes raised his lantern, illuminating the chamber's far end. There, kneeling before a particularly ancient tomb, was Victoria. She seemed oblivious to our presence, murmuring words we couldn't distinguish, her hands caressing the stone effigy's face with disturbing tenderness. "Victoria," Holmes called softly. She turned, unsurprised by our appearance. In the lantern light, her face seemed transformed, older somehow, her features sharper, her eyes holding an expression I had never seen before. "You found me," she said, simply, "just as he found me." "Nathaniel?" Holmes inquired, approaching cautiously. She nodded. "He discovered the truth, that Catherine's blood and Edward's flow together in my veins, a circle completed after centuries." "Did you kill him for that discovery?" Holmes asked directly. Victoria's laugh was hollow. "Kill him? I loved him. When he learned of my heritage, he was fascinated, not repulsed. He wanted to break the curse by uniting our bloodlines in marriage, a poetic resolution to centuries of hatred." "Then who?" James began. "Someone who believes justice has been too long denied," she replied, rising to her feet with fluid grace. "Someone who has waited for this moment for generations." "You speak as if this person isn't you," Holmes observed. "Yet you seem to know their mind intimately." Victoria's gaze moved to the tomb beside her. "Catherine speaks to me in dreams, has done since I was a child. I thought them merely nightmares, until Nathaniel's research revealed the truth of my ancestry." "Dreams cannot commit murder, Miss Blackwood," Holmes said firmly. "No," she agreed, "but they can guide hands." She gestured towards the tomb's lid. "Open it. See what Nathaniel discovered." With some effort, Holmes and I pushed aside the heavy stone lid. The sarcophagus contained not a body, but a collection of items. Ancient books, a woman's garments yellowed with age, and most disturbingly, a small portrait showing a woman with Victoria's exact features. "Theron Beaumont," Victoria whispered. "My ancestress. The resemblance is uncanny, is it not?" "Indeed," Holmes agreed, lifting the portrait for closer examination. "But this doesn't explain the murders." "Doesn't it?" Victoria's voice had changed subtly. "Edward betrayed her, left her to die at Cromwell's hands, denied his unborn child. But her baby survived, smuggled from prison by a sympathetic guard, raised in secret by distant family. Catherine's bloodline continued, always watching the Blackwoods from afar, waiting for the appointed time. Every third generation," James murmured. "The curse, not a curse," Victoria corrected. "A promise of justice. Catherine swore that when her blood rejoined the Blackwood line, the betrayer's male descendants would pay the price of his treachery." "And you believe yourself the instrument of this centuries-old vengeance?" Holmes asked skeptically. Victoria's eyes flashed in the lantern light. "I am both Blackwood and Beaumont. When Nathaniel discovered this, he thought our marriage would end the cycle. Instead, it sealed his fate." A sound behind us made me turn. Percival Blackwood stood in the passage, entrance, deathly pale but upright, a revolver clutched in his trembling hand. "I should have killed you first," he hissed at Victoria. "Percival!" James exclaimed. "You should be resting. Rest. While she lives." Percival's laugh was bitter. "I found Nathaniel's research before she did. I knew what it meant. The bloodlines converging. the curse fulfilled unless I acted. Holmes stepped forward. You killed your own brother. To save our family, Percival shouted. Nathaniel was bewitched by her, blind to the danger. When he told me of their planned marriage, I knew there was no other way. The curse would be complete if their bloodlines united in offspring. So you staged his murder to appear supernatural, Holmes said, piecing it together, using the hidden passages and the legend to disguise your crime, and then tried to kill me as well, Victoria added, her calm undisturbed by the revelation. But Catherine wouldn't allow it. She's been protecting me, guiding me. Madness, Percival spat, raising the revolver. It ends now. As he squeezed the trigger, a sudden gust of wind extinguished Holmes's lantern, plunging the crypt into total darkness. The shot rang out, followed by a scream that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. When James managed to relight the lantern with shaking hands, Percival lay unconscious on the stone floor, blood seeping from a wound on his temple. But it wasn't from the gunshot. His revolver lay unfired beside him, and on the wall behind where he had stood, written in fresh blood that seemed to have appeared from nowhere, "Justice is served, but not yet complete." Chapter 8. The Final Brother. I knelt beside Percival's unconscious form, examining the wound on his temple. It appears he was struck by something heavy, possibly a piece of fallen masonry. The storm may have loosened stones from the ceiling. De Holmes surveyed the ancient crypt, his lantern revealing no obvious debris near Percival. "Perhaps," he murmured, though I detected doubt in his tone. With James's help, I bandaged Percival's head. The wound was not life-threatening, but combined with his earlier gunshot injury, his condition remained precarious. "We need to get him back to the house," I insisted. As we carefully lifted Percival, Holmes approached Victoria, who remained unnaturally calm amidst the chaos. "Miss Blackwood, I must ask you directly, did you have any part in your cousin Nathaniel's death?" "No," she replied without hesitation, though Catherine might disagree. "Explain," Holmes demanded. Victoria's eyes held a distant quality. "Catherine believes I was simply the instrument of fate, that by coming to Blackwood Manor, by capturing Nathaniel's heart, I set in motion events prophesied centuries ago. But I loved him, Mr. Holmes. I would never have harmed him." "And yet you seem unsurprised by these events," Holmes observed, "even by Percival's confession." "Because Catherine showed me in dreams. She revealed that Percival had discovered Nathaniel's research and feared what our union would bring. She tried to warn Nathaniel, but he wouldn't listen." "Dreams cannot predict murder, Miss Blackwood," Holmes said firmly. "Perhaps not ordinary dreams," she conceded, "but mine have never been ordinary." We made our way back through the passages, carrying Percival between us. The storm had intensified, thunder crashing overhead as rain lashed against the manor's ancient stones. Once we had settled Percival in his bedchamber under the watchful eye of the house servants, Holmes led us to the library. The bloody message on the ceiling had faded, but its ominous promise lingered in our minds. "Justice is served, but not yet complete," Holmes recited thoughtfully. "Percival has been exposed as Nathaniel's killer, yet something remains unresolved. The curse speaks of all three Blackwood brothers," I suggested. "Nathaniel is dead. Percival gravely wounded. Leaving James, Holmes finished, turning to our host with a penetrating gaze. James paled visibly. Surely you don't think I'm in danger? Percival has been stopped. Yet the pattern established in 1831 involved the deaths of all three brothers. Holmes reminded him. And if we are to believe the legend, the curse requires the same now. Victoria, who had been silently examining Nathaniel's research materials, suddenly spoke. You're all misinterpreting the curse. It never demanded the deaths of all three brothers. The historical record suggests otherwise, I objected. The historical record is incomplete, she countered, producing a thin volume from among Nathaniel's papers. This journal belonged to Catherine's daughter, Mary. Listen, Mother's dying words were not a curse upon all Blackwoods, but a promise that Edward's male heirs would face justice for their shared guilt. 3 generations hence, and 3 again, the truth would be revealed when her blood rejoined his. Shared guilt? Holmes inquired. What could that mean? Victoria turned several pages. Here, Mary writes, I have discovered the full measure of my father's treachery. Edward Blackwood was not alone in his betrayal. His brothers William and Thomas helped deliver the royalist soldiers to Cromwell's men in exchange for titles and land. My mother's blood is on all their hands. 3 brothers, James whispered, just like now. And in 1831, I added, the pattern repeats. Holmes was already piecing it together. Edward's brothers were complicit in Catherine's betrayal. Therefore, all 3 bloodlines, Edward's, William's, and Thomas's, bear the guilt. In 1831, the male descendants of all 3 lines died mysteriously. And now, we 3 brothers are the descendants of those same lines, James confirmed. Percival from Edward's line, Nathaniel from William's, and I from Thomas's. Then, according to the curse, or promise rather, justice requires accountability from all 3 lines. Holmes concluded. Percival killed Nathaniel, believing he was preventing the curse. In doing so, he fulfilled part of it. But what of James? I asked. If the pattern holds. Victoria's expression darkened. Catherine still demands justice from Thomas's line. From you, James. A crack of lightning illuminated the library, casting long shadows across James's troubled face. What form might this justice take? Must I die as well? I believe the answer lies in how the curse was meant to end, Holmes said, returning to Nathaniel's research. His notes suggest he believed the joining of the bloodlines, his marriage to Victoria, would satisfy Catherine's demand for justice, not through death, but through reconciliation. Victoria nodded. That's what he told me the night before he died, that our love would heal centuries of hatred. Then, perhaps, Holmes suggested, justice for James might take a different form than death. Confession, James said suddenly, his voice strained. Full acknowledgement of the crime. That's what Catherine wants. What she's always wanted. Recognition of the wrong done to her. As if in response to his words, the candles in the library flickered, casting weird shadows on the walls. The temperature dropped precipitously, our breath visible in the sudden chill. She's here, Victoria whispered. Catherine is among us. Holmes remained pragmatic. Draft from the storm, he suggested, though even he seemed unsettled by the abrupt change in atmosphere. James rose from his chair, addressing the empty air with formal dignity. I, James Blackwood, descendant of Thomas Blackwood, acknowledge the grave injustice done to Catherine Beaumont by my ancestor. On behalf of my family line, I offer sincere contrition for the betrayal that led to her death and the separation of her child. I pledge to right this historical wrong by recognizing Victoria as the rightful heir to both bloodlines and by preserving the true account of these events for all future generations. As he spoke the final words, a profound silence fell over the room. The storm outside seemed to pause, the thunder receding into distant murmurs. The candles steadied, burning with unusual brightness. On the table before us, a single drop of what appeared to be blood fell onto the open journal of Catherine's daughter. It spread across the page, forming not words this time, but the clear outline of a rose. The same rose that adorned the Beaumont family crest Victoria had shown us earlier. "Acceptance," Victoria murmured, the blood of hatred transformed into the symbol of love. As we watched in stunned silence, the blood rose dried instantly, becoming a permanent mark upon the page, testimony to whatever had transpired in that moment. "It seems," Holmes said quietly, "that some form of justice has indeed been served, but a sudden cry from upstairs shattered the moment of peace. One of the servants appeared at the library door, her face white with terror. Chapter 9. The Final Justice. We rushed to Percival's bedchamber, where a grisly scene awaited us. The sheets were saturated with blood, a crimson trail leading from the bed to the door and out into the corridor. But of Percival himself there was no sign. "How is this possible?" James demanded of the terrified maid, who had been stationed outside. "You were instructed not to leave your post." "I didn't, sir. Not for a moment," she insisted. "There were no sounds, no disturbance. I swear it on my mother's grave." Holmes was already examining the blood trail, which led down the corridor toward the east wing. "His wounds were severe, but not immediately life-threatening," he murmured to me. "Could he have regained consciousness and moved under his own power?" "Extremely unlikely," I replied. "The combined blood loss from both injuries would render him too weak to walk far, if at all." "Then someone, or something, moved him," Holmes concluded, his expression troubled. "And recently, this blood is still wet." The trail led us directly to Nathaniel's study, where the door stood ajar. Inside, the room appeared much as we had left it earlier, except for one horrifying addition. Percival Blackwood sat slumped in his dead brother's chair, his throat torn open in exactly the same manner as Nathaniel's had been. Blood had pooled on the desk before him, forming distinct patterns that could no longer be dismissed as random. "God," James whispered, crossing himself instinctively. Victoria approached the desk slowly, her face showing no surprise, only a profound sadness. "It's finished now," she said softly. "Edward's line ends with Percival." Holmes circled the room, methodically, examining the windows and doors. All were locked from the inside, the key once again in the inner lock. The hidden passage we had discovered earlier was sealed shut, with no signs of recent disturbance in the dust along its threshold. "Another locked room mystery," I observed, "identical to Nathaniel's death." "With one crucial difference," Holmes replied, pointing to Percival's right hand, Clutched in his rigid fingers was a blood-stained dagger of antique design, its blade matching perfectly the wounds in his throat. It appears our killer has taken his own life. "But why?" James asked. "And how did he get here from his bedchamber?" "And to how?" Holmes said grimly. "I cannot yet say with certainty. As to why." He carefully extracted a folded paper from beneath Percival's left hand. His confession, it would seem. The paper was spotted with blood, but the writing remained legible. Holmes read it aloud. "I, Percival Blackwood, confess to the murder of my brother Nathaniel. When I discovered his plans to marry Victoria and learned of her dual heritage, I feared the completion of our family curse. Using the secret passages I had discovered as a child, I staged his death to appear supernatural, hoping to drive Victoria from Blackwood Manor. When that failed, I attempted to kill her as well, but fate intervened. Tonight, she came to me. Not Victoria, but Catherine herself. Her face was Victoria's face, yet not. She stood beside my bed, weeping tears of blood, and I knew my end had come. She bade me rise and follow her to this room, where justice would be complete. I could not resist her command. Let this confession end 3 centuries of betrayal and blood. With my death, Edward's line is extinguished. May Catherine's spirit find peace at last." A heavy silence followed Holmes's recitation, broken only by the fading rumble of thunder as the storm gradually moved away from Blackwood Manor. "A deathbed confession," I said quietly. "But how could he have written this in his condition? And how did he reach this room?" "Those," Holmes admitted, "remain the central mysteries." Victoria moved to the window, staring out at the rain-washed grounds now visible in the pale light of early dawn. "Some questions have no rational answers, Mr. Holmes. Catherine's justice is complete. Edward's line ends with Percival, just as William's ended with Nathaniel, leaving only Thomas's descendant," Holmes noted, glancing at James. "You, Mr. Blackwood." James seemed to have aged years in a single night, his face drawn with fatigue and shock. "Am I to meet the same fate?" "I think not," Victoria replied before Holmes could speak. "Your acknowledgement was accepted. The bloodline continues through you, but cleansed by confession and contrition." Holmes remained silent, his keen eyes moving between the confession, the dagger, and the locked door. I knew that expression well. My friend was troubled by elements of this case that defied his rational mind. "You don't believe Percival committed suicide, do you, Holmes?" I asked quietly. "The evidence suggests he did," Holmes replied carefully. "Yet the manner of his arrival here, the nature of his wounds, there are aspects that remain unsatisfactorily explained." Victoria turned from the window. "Not everything can be explained by your science, Mr. Holmes. Some truths lie beyond rational understanding." "Perhaps," Holmes conceded, though the admission clearly cost him. "But my professional obligation is to determine what occurred here through logical deduction. And what does your logical deduction tell you?" she challenged gently. Holmes sighed, an unusual gesture of uncertainty from my typically confident friend. "That Percival Blackwood killed his brother out of misguided fear. That he attempted to kill you for the same reason. that he somehow travelled from his sickbed to this room despite his injuries, that he confessed his crimes and took his own life. These are the facts as they appear. But you're not satisfied, James observed. There are gaps in my understanding, Holmes admitted reluctantly. Victoria smiled faintly. Then perhaps, Mr. Holmes, you might permit one impossible thing to remain unexplained, for Catherine's sake. Dawn broke fully over Blackwood Manor. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the study windows, illuminating the portrait of Edward Blackwood that hung on the far wall. For a brief moment, a trick of the light surely. It seemed as though tears of blood streaked down the painted face. But as quickly as it appeared, the illusion vanished, leaving only the stern countenance of a long-dead man whose betrayal had echoed through centuries. I believe, Holmes said finally, that we have witnessed the conclusion of a very old promise. Whether by human hand or otherwise, justice has been served. As we left the study, I noticed something I had missed before, a small fresh rose lying on the threshold, its petals as red as blood. Chapter 10. Morning Light. The morning brought a stark transformation to Blackwood Manor. Sunlight streamed through windows that had previously framed only darkness and storm, illuminating corners that had seemed sinister just hours before. The house felt different somehow, lighter, as though some oppressive presence had finally departed its ancient walls. Inspector Lestrade and 2 constables from the nearest police station arrived by mid-morning, summoned by Holmes via telegram the previous day. The inspector listened with growing incredulity as Holmes recounted the extraordinary events that had transpired. "Let me understand this clearly," Lestrade said when Holmes had finished. "Percival Blackwood murdered his brother Nathaniel, attempted to kill his other brother James, failed, staged an attack upon himself, then somehow, despite grave injuries, made his way to his dead brother's study, where he confessed and took his own life. Those are the facts as they appear," Holmes replied carefully. Lestrade's sceptical expression spoke volumes. And these locked rooms, the hidden passages, this family curse. "The passages explain much," Holmes said. "As for the rest, there are elements of this case that resist conventional explanation." It was as close as I had ever heard my friend come to admitting the possibility of supernatural intervention. While Lestrade and his men conducted their official investigation, Holmes and I joined James and Victoria for a sombre breakfast in the morning room. The night's events had left visible marks on them both. James looked haggard, while Victoria possessed a strange serenity, as though some long-awaited resolution had finally come to pass. "What will happen now?" James asked wearily. "The official verdict will likely be that Percival killed Nathaniel out of jealousy or greed, then took his own life when discovery was imminent," Holmes replied. "Inspector Lestrade is not fond of unconventional explanations." "And the curse?" Victoria inquired softly. Holmes hesitated, choosing his words with uncharacteristic care. "I believe that whatever force, be it justice, vengeance, or something else entirely, that has haunted this house for generations, has now found its completion. 2 bloodlines have ended. One continues with the burden of acknowledgement. The core circle is closed. You speak almost like a believer, Mr. Holmes," Victoria observed with the ghost of a smile. "I speak as one who has witnessed events that challenge my understanding," he replied, Whether those events have natural explanations, I have yet to discern, or whether they truly transcend rational analysis, I cannot say with certainty. After breakfast, Victoria led us to the library, where she unlocked a cabinet none of us had noticed before. From within, she withdrew a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. "Nathaniel gave me this the night before he died," she explained, opening the box to reveal an antique locket. "It belonged to Catherine Beaumont. Her initial is engraved on the back." The locket was exquisite craftsmanship, clearly from the Civil War era. When Victoria opened it, we saw it contain 2 miniature portraits. A woman bearing a striking resemblance to Victoria herself, and a man whose features echoed those of the Blackwood brothers. "Edward and Catherine," Holmes murmured. "Together, despite everything." Nathaniel believed that their love was genuine, at least initially, Victoria said. That Edward's betrayal came not from malice, but from weakness and fear during a time of terrible conflict. That may explain why Catherine's vengeance was so specific, I suggested. Not the destruction of all Blackwoods, but justice from the 3 brothers who betrayed her. James studied the portraits thoughtfully. "I will ensure this story is preserved accurately in our family records. No more lies, no more secrets." Victoria closed the locket. "I believe I shall leave Blackwood Manor soon. There are too many ghosts here, both literal and figurative." "And where will you go?" I asked. "To Catherine's ancestral home in Devon," she replied. "It still stands, though it passed out of the family long ago. I've recently acquired it. Perhaps there, both Catherine and I can find peace." Later, as Holmes and I packed our belongings in preparation for the afternoon train, I found my friend standing by the window, gazing out at the manor grounds with an unusually contemplative expression. "You're troubled by the loose ends," I observed. "Not troubled precisely," he replied, "but this case has certainly challenged my fundamental principles. Throughout my career, I have maintained that once all impossible explanations are eliminated, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." And now Holmes turned to me, his keen eyes reflecting inner conflict. "I find myself considering whether some truths might lie beyond the realm of the probable, or even the improbable, in domains I have previously dismissed as impossible." That seems a rather significant concession from the most logical man I know. A faint smile crossed his features. Perhaps logic itself must expand to encompass phenomena we do not yet understand. The boundaries of the possible are not fixed, Watson, but expand with human knowledge. Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. A servant entered, bearing a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For you, Mr. Holmes." Miss Victoria asked that it be delivered before your departure. Holmes unwrapped the package to reveal a single pressed rose and a note in Victoria's elegant hand. "Some mysteries are meant to be experienced rather than solved. Thank you for allowing Catherine her final justice. The rose was found on her grave this morning, where no roses grow." Holmes stared at the pressed flower for a long moment before carefully placing it in his notebook. "Will you write up this case, Watson?" he asked as we descended the grand staircase for the final time. "I'm not certain," I admitted. "It's unlike any we've encountered. I doubt the public would accept a Sherlock Holmes adventure with unresolved elements." "Then perhaps this one remains between us," Holmes suggested. Some truths are not meant for public consumption. Not yet, at any rate. As our carriage pulled away from Blackwood Manor, I glanced back at the imposing structure. For a brief moment, I thought I glimpsed a woman's figure at an upper window. Her face victorious, yet somehow not. Tears like rubies glistening on her pale cheeks. Then the carriage rounded a bend, and Blackwood Manor vanished from view. Chapter 11. The Return to Baker Street. Our journey back to London was largely spent in contemplative silence. Holmes smoked his pipe steadily, his sharp gaze fixed on the passing countryside, though I suspected his mind was far away, still wandering the secret passages of Blackwood Manor. For my part, I found myself repeatedly reviewing the extraordinary events we had witnessed, attempting to separate reason from the seemingly supernatural. The evening papers awaited us at Baker Street, their headlines already proclaiming the sensational nature of the Blackwood case, though with details wildly inaccurate. Family curse claims 2 lives in Cumberland Manor, declared the Evening Standard. Ancient ghost takes revenge, proclaimed another with less restraint. Holmes cast the papers aside with a snort of derision. Lestrade has been talking, it seems, though thankfully his understanding of events was limited. Will you be making a statement to correct these accounts? I asked. Holmes settled into his favourite chair, reaching for his tobacco pouch. To what end, Watson? To explain that Percival Blackwood murdered his brother, then took his own life. That much is factually correct, if incomplete. The rest, he shrugged, let the public have their ghost story. The truth is more complex than any newspaper could adequately convey. Mrs. Hudson brought us a late supper, which Holmes, to my surprise, consumed with genuine appetite. The case had evidently stimulated rather than suppressed his physical needs, unusual for him during an investigation. You seem changed by this experience, Holmes, I observed as we sat before the fire. The familiar surroundings of Baker Street, a welcome contrast to the Gothic atmosphere of Blackwood Manor. Do I? He raised an eyebrow. In what way? You've been less dismissive of the inexplicable elements of the case than is your custom. Typically, you would insist that every detail must have a rational explanation. Holmes was silent for a long moment, the firelight casting deep shadows across his angular features. I maintain that the universe is governed by natural laws, Watson. What I have perhaps reconsidered is the breadth and scope of those laws. There may be forces at work that science has yet to categorize or understand. Forces that might appear supernatural to our limited perception? Precisely, he agreed. Consider the discoveries of recent decades. The invisible rays that can penetrate solid matter. The transmission of messages through the air without wires. What would our grandfathers have called such phenomena but magic or spirits? A comfortable silence fell between us, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of London traffic. Eventually, Holmes rose and went to his desk, withdrawing the pressed rose Victoria had given him, and examining it under his magnifying glass. Curious, he murmured. This rose is of a variety I've never encountered before. The petal structure is unusual. Before I could respond, there was a sudden knock at our door. Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a telegram addressed to Holmes. He opened it with a quick movement, his expression changing subtly as he read its contents. From James Blackwood, he announced. "Listen to this, Watson. Remarkable discovery in family archives. Found Edward Blackwood's private journal. Lost. Entry claims Catherine escaped execution. Fled with unborn child. Betrayal more complex than believed. Letter follows with details." "Escaped?" I echoed, surprised. "But the family legend clearly states she was executed." "Legends evolve to serve narrative purposes," Holmes replied, tapping the telegram thoughtfully against his palm. "If Catherine escaped, lived to bear her child, and perhaps even orchestrated the beginning of the curse herself, then the entire supernatural element could be explained as a generational vendetta," I suggested. "Passed down through Catherine's descendants, culminating in Victoria." Holmes shook his head. "That would explain some elements, but not all." "Je knew. Did Percival, grievously wounded, reach Nathaniel's study? How did blood appear on walls and ceilings when no one was present? How did Victoria vanish from between us in a darkened corridor?" "You believe there truly was a ghost?" I asked incredulously. "I believe," Holmes said carefully, "that our understanding of death and what may lie beyond it is woefully incomplete. Science has mapped many territories, Watson, but the borderlands between life and death remain largely uncharted." A gust of wind rattled the windows, momentarily drawing our attention. When I looked back at Holmes, I was startled to see him holding a small leather-bound book that had not been in his hands seconds before. "Where did that come from?" I demanded. Holmes appeared equally surprised. "It was. I found it among my belongings when unpacking," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. The book was ancient, its binding cracked with age. Holmes opened it carefully, revealing pages covered in faded, feminine handwriting. "My God," he whispered, "it's Catherine Beaumont's diary." "Impossible," I exclaimed. "It must be a reproduction, or—" "The paper dates from the 1640s, Holmes interrupted, his experienced eye assessing the material. "The ink composition is consistent with that period. This is genuine, Watson." He turned to the final entry, dated 2 days after her supposed execution. "I live, though the world believes me dead. Edward's youngest brother Thomas, overcome by conscience, arranged my escape. I shall bear my child in secret and bide my time. Edward believes he has silenced me, but my voice shall echo through generations. Justice comes not in haste, but in fullness of time, when my blood and his shall mingle once more. This changes everything," I murmured. "And yet explains nothing," Holmes countered. "How did this book come to be in my possession? I certainly did not pack it." Before I could speculate, Mrs. Hudson entered again, this time bearing a letter that had just arrived by special messenger. The envelope bore the Blackwood crest and was addressed to Holmes in an elegant feminine hand. Holmes opened it with uncharacteristic hesitation. As he read, his face paled slightly. "From Victoria," he said. "James Blackwood died last night, peacefully, in his sleep." "The third brother," I whispered. "But you said the curse was resolved, that his line would continue." She writes, "Do not be alarmed. His passing was without violence or pain. The physician attributes it to heart failure, brought on by strain and shock. Catherine's justice is complete, but in mercy rather than vengeance. The Blackwood line continues through James's son. who returns from Oxford tomorrow, unaware of our family's recent tragedy." Holmes sat down heavily in his chair. "I had no knowledge that James had a son." "Nor I," I agreed. "It seems the Blackwoods kept many secrets." Victoria concludes, "The diary you now possess was Catherine's final bequest to you, Mr. Holmes. She believed you, alone among men, might understand the truth that bridges the worlds of the living and the dead. Some justice transcends human courts and human understanding. Guard her truth as you see fit." For the first time in our long association, I saw Sherlock Holmes truly speechless. He stared at the diary in his hands as though it might vanish as mysteriously as it had appeared. "What will you do with it?" I asked eventually. Holmes closed the book carefully. "Study it. Learn from it. Perhaps in time the world will be ready for its revelations." As night fell over Baker Street, Holmes placed Catherine's diary in his wall safe, behind a copy of Whitaker's Almanac. Neither of us spoke of it again that evening, but as I retired to my room, I could have sworn I detected the faint scent of roses in the air where no roses bloomed. Chapter 12. Beyond the veil 1 year had passed since the extraordinary events at Blackwood Manor. The case had faded from public interest, relegated to occasional sensationalist references in periodicals discussing supernatural phenomena. Holmes and I had taken on numerous other investigations in the intervening months. Yet I noticed that my friend would occasionally fall into contemplative silences, his gaze distant as though revisiting the mysteries we had encountered in Cumberland. It was on the anniversary of our departure from Blackwood Manor that Holmes received a package bearing the postmark of Devon. Inside was a letter from Victoria Blackwood, along with a small wooden box of evident antiquity. She writes that she has settled well into Catherine's ancestral home, Holmes informed me as he examined the letter. The renovations are complete, and she has established a small museum dedicated to preserving the true history of Catherine Beaumont and the Blackwood family. "And what of James's son?" I inquired, recalling the young heir who had been away at Oxford during our investigation. He has taken up residence at Blackwood Manor, though Victoria notes he spends little time there, preferring London society. The family curse appears to hold no interest for him, which is perhaps for the best. Holmes turned his attention to the wooden box, opening it carefully. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay a small golden key of unusual design. "Curious," Holmes murmured, lifting it for closer inspection. "This appears to be several centuries old, yet shows little sign of wear." I peered at the key with interest. "What does Victoria say about it?" Holmes consulted the letter again. She discovered it hidden in a compartment within Catherine's writing desk, a piece she purchased when acquiring the Devon property. She believes it may be significant to our understanding of the case, and thought you might wish to include it in your written account, should you ever decide to publish the story. "I have no intention of publishing this particular adventure," I admitted. "As you yourself noted, the public has little appetite for a Sherlock Holmes who cannot explain every detail through pure rationality." Holmes smiled faintly. "Yet private records have their value, Watson. Future generations may be more receptive to mysteries that span the divide between the known and the unknown." That evening, as a spring storm battered against our windows, Holmes sat examining Catherine's diary by lamplight. I had rarely seen him consult it in the past year, but tonight he seemed drawn to its yellowed pages with unusual intensity. "Listen to this passage, Watson," he said suddenly. "I have secured my most precious possession, where neither Edward nor his brothers shall find it. The key remains with me always, but should I perish, it shall pass to my daughter, and through her line until the time of reckoning comes." Holmes held up the golden key, its surface catching the lamplight. "I believe this is the key Catherine mentions, passed down through generations until it reached Victoria. But the key to what? I wondered. That, Holmes replied, is the final mystery of Catherine Beaumont. A month later, circumstances brought us to Devon on an unrelated case. Holmes suggested we might pay a visit to Victoria at Catherine's restored ancestral home, Beaumont Hall. I readily agreed, curious to see how she had fared in the aftermath of the tragic events at Blackwood Manor. Beaumont Hall proved to be a modest Elizabethan manor house, far less imposing than the Blackwood estate, but possessed of a quiet dignity. Gardens that had clearly been recently restored surrounded the house, with roses of unusual variety growing in particular abundance. Victoria welcomed us warmly, looking remarkably transformed from when we had last seen her. Gone was the haunted pallor and nervous tension. In their place was a composed, almost serene countenance. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, what a pleasant surprise," she greeted us. "I had hoped you might visit some day." Over tea, she showed us the small museum she had created, dedicated to telling Catherine's true story. Historical documents, personal items, and family artifacts were tastefully displayed, including Edward Blackwood's sword. Purchased, she explained, from the current master of Blackwood Manor, who had little interest in family heirlooms. "And the key?" Holmes inquired. "Have you discovered its purpose?" A mysterious smile crossed Victoria's face. "I believe I have, though its lock remains elusive. But perhaps it's not a physical lock that requires opening." Later, as Victoria led us through the gardens, she paused beside a small stone building that appeared far older than the main house. "The original Beaumont Chapel," she explained, "dating from before the Reformation. It was sealed for centuries until I had it restored. Inside, the chapel was simple but beautiful, with a single stained glass window depicting a rose surrounded by thorns. Beneath this window stood a small altar of unadorned stone. "I found something curious here during the restoration," Victoria said, leading us to the altar. "This stone bears an unusual marking." She pointed to what appeared to be a small indentation in the altar's surface, barely noticeable unless one knew to look for it. Its shape was distinctive. "The key," Holmes exclaimed softly. Victoria nodded. "I've not yet tried it. Something told me to wait, perhaps for the right witnesses." She produced the golden key from a chain around her neck. With steady hands, she placed it into the indentation. It fit perfectly. After a moment's hesitation, she turned it. A soft click echoed through the chapel, and a section of the altar's side slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. From within, Victoria withdrew a small leather pouch, its contents forming a distinctive shape. "Another key?" I asked, perplexed. "No," Victoria replied. carefully opening the pouch to reveal a locket identical to the one she had shown us at Blackwood Manor. Yet this one was intact, not a replica. Catherine's true locket, the one I showed you before, was a copy, made after her supposed death. She opened it to reveal not portraits, but a small folded piece of parchment, preserved remarkably well within its golden confines. With trembling fingers, Victoria unfolded it and read, "To those who find this in time to come, know that I, Catherine Beaumont, did not perish by Edward Blackwood's betrayal. My death was feigned, my escape secured by Thomas Blackwood's remorse. My child lives, born of love before it turned to treachery. I place no curse upon the Blackwood name, only a promise that truth shall one day be revealed. Justice comes not from vengeance, but from understanding. When my blood and Edward's join again in knowledge rather than ignorance, the circle shall be complete. Until then I watch, neither truly living nor truly dead, but waiting in the shadows between." A profound silence fell upon the chapel as Victoria finished reading. Outside the wind had risen, rustling through the roses that surrounded the ancient building. "Neither truly living nor truly dead," Holmes repeated softly, a rather poetic description of how memory and legacy persist beyond physical existence. Victoria's eyes met his with knowing intensity. "Is that all it is, Mr. Holmes? Merely poetic language?" Before Holmes could respond, a sudden shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the stained glass rose. The coloured light fell directly upon the altar, creating a pattern of crimson and gold across the ancient stone. A pattern that for just a moment resembled a woman's weeping face. Then the clouds closed again, and the vision, if vision it was, vanished. "Some mysteries," Victoria said quietly, "are meant to remain mysteries, Mr. Holmes. Not because they cannot be solved, but because their solutions lie beyond our current understanding." For once, the great detective did not argue. On our journey back to London, Holmes was unusually reflective. "What will you write of this case, Watson, in your private records?" I considered the question carefully. That we encountered a mystery with both natural and potentially supernatural elements. That justice long delayed finally found its completion. That some truths may indeed lie beyond the veil of our normal perceptions. Holmes nodded slowly, a fair assessment, and I would add only this, that while I remain dedicated to rational explanation, I have come to believe that the boundaries of rationality may extend further than I once thought. Perhaps in time, science will explain what we now consider inexplicable. And until then, a faint smile crossed my friend's austere features. Until then, we acknowledge the limits of our knowledge while continuing to push against them. That, I believe, is the true spirit of inquiry. As our train approached London, I noticed Holmes slip his hand into his pocket, extracting something small that caught the light. Catherine's golden key, which Victoria had insisted he keep as a remembrance. "A reminder," Holmes murmured, almost to himself, "that some doors remain yet to be opened." The key gleamed in the fading light as Holmes returned it to his pocket. A small golden mystery that had, in its way, unlocked something far greater than a stone altar. The recognition that even the most logical mind must sometimes accept that truth can transcend purely rational boundaries. And somewhere, perhaps, Catherine Beaumont's restless spirit had finally found the peace that had eluded her for 3 centuries, her justice at last complete.